Welcome to the Pacific Leadership Briefing and warm Pacific greetings to all of you. My name is Audrey Elmore and I'm from the Pacific community, and I have the great pleasure of moderating and facilitating this session, and I do warmly welcome all of you. At the platform this week, there are just over 60 delegates from the Pacific region, representing more than a dozen countries. And I want to acknowledge just first out the contribution and the support of both the governments of New Zealand and Australia for making this participation possible. This afternoon we are going to hear from three countries, and I'd like to introduce them, if I may, first of all to you, and then invite them to make some opening remarks. The media then will be invited to ask a number of questions. First of all, I'd like to introduce the President of the Republic of Kiribati, His Excellency Mr. Taneti Ma'amu. Next to him is the Fiji Permanent Secretary, the Ministry of Rural and Maritime Development and National Disaster Management, Mr. Meleti Bainimarama. And we also have the Chair of the National Disaster Operations Committee, Mr. Lottie Yates from the Solomon Islands. Gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the media briefing this afternoon. The Pacific Community, for those of you who don't know, is a regional-based organization. It is primarily a scientific and technical agency, and of course I'm very honored to be here to support the Pacific Voices who are participating on the global stage today. Yesterday, the Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Amina Mohammed, actually acknowledged the country of Kiribati, a great island nation inflicted significantly by climate change and disaster risk, in her opening remarks at the plenary. And I think this was a very important landmark point to have been made at the opening session. On that note, I'd really like to invite at this point the President of Kiribati, His Excellency Taneti Ma'amu, to make some opening remarks. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General for the Pacific Community in the Pacific. And my dear colleagues from Fiji and the Solomon Islands, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I would like first of all to thank the SPC and those who organized this side event forum on the occasion of this 5th Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, and especially a time for this press conference, which I personally think it is a relevant aspect of all this kind of conferences. Anyway, in terms of disaster risk reduction and climate change, and in the case of Kiribati, as you might be aware, Kiribati, our major disasters in Kiribati are mainly those of hydrometeorological by nature, and that is related to the atmospheric, hydrological, and oceanography, these sort of issues that affect us. And the examples include coastal erosion, flooding, spring tides, and storm surges, which are generated by tropical cyclones, to name a few. And one of the most common disasters affecting the country right now is the drought, which has about 2 or 3 years now happening, as well as the coastal erosion, which is an ongoing disaster. In relation to, of course, to issues like population, as well as the non-communicable diseases, which are, in essence, are disasters, humanitarian disasters by themselves. And in relation to what we have been doing in line with these global and regional frameworks, of course, we have Kiribati Development Plan, and in that plan we have incorporated disaster risk reduction as well as climate change adaptations. And one of the chapters in our plan relates to environment, and that is where most of these disaster-related aspects, including climate change, are reflected. And although they may not be as effectively implemented, or the quality of implementation may not be that effective, but we certainly have realized that these are fundamental issues to be taken at a macro level. Quite recently, we have established a new sort of longer-term framework. We call it the Kiribati Vision 20. And we have included in that framework one of the sections on peace and security, and with the ultimate aim of incorporating all the disaster-related aspects as well as climate change. And mainly border issues are also highlighted in that. And of course, because the vision, Kiribati Vision 20, has two predominant sectors to lead and guide development. Hopefully, by 20, our people, the lives will be uplifted in a better condition. And the sectors are fisheries and tourism. And therefore, fisheries, we have, well, the Pacific Ocean is so big, and Kiribati is fortunate to be one of the custodians of a biggest ocean. But the monitoring and the security of that big ocean is by far too difficult to control and to monitor. And we have only one patrol boat, and with an ocean of 3.5 million square kilometers, with a land mass of about 800 square kilometers, you would understand how difficult with that in terms of management and control. But anyway, we are quite grateful for the continuing assistance of some of our bilateral countries, as well as our regional and multilateral partners. They have done quite a lot in terms of providing technical assistance, as well as actual funding. But the funding element, as I highlighted in my presentation yesterday, was we may have now the basics put in place in terms of planning, incorporating this disaster risk aspect into our economic planning. But we may have that basics, but I think the crucial issue is, and the underlying issue is the money. And our public resources are not sufficient enough to address this kind of climatic issues, big issues in a way. And so we need to partner with the private sector. One of the sectors that is most active in development in Kiribati, but not only in Kiribati, but as well as throughout the Pacific, is the churches. The churches in Kiribati are one of the major partners in development. But we need to come up with a model to harness all these the synergies in the various sectors, including the NGOs, in order so we can take them on in terms of their funding, not only their funding, but in terms of their contribution through their services. And in Kiribati, the churches are, most of their services in their developments are voluntary. But just like the other community services. But when it comes to government projects, that is a big challenge, because now they are asking for rewards. And I think we can't, with limited funding, we need to come up with a more innovative way of harnessing all these efforts, efforts across the country. In terms of one of the big issues that we are facing at the planning level is basically the lack of data. And we don't have that data in terms, because that's what we need. We need the information. We need information to come up with better and good plans. And we don't have that capacity, especially in assessing these disaster-related consequences. And we have the UN body, the UN family body in Kiribati, and we've been sitting with them in order to assist in this kind of area. Our warning systems are quite limited, very fragile. A country of 33 islands, all scattered. And we have the only connection right now is the HF radio system. And sometimes they don't operate 24 hours. And we thought government, through this new Kiribati Vision 20, will need to improve the communication planning and communication systems throughout the country. We are introducing the mobile telephone with a new telecommunication company in Kiribati. Unfortunately, there is only one right now, but we are planning to introduce another competitor because that is the key sector. One of the supportive sectors in terms of economic development, and especially when the economies of scale in Kiribati are lacking because of the disaggregation of the islands. And as I said, the population is another burden to take care of, in addition to all these natural disasters, as well as the NCDs. Mind you, I think NCD is the most critical factor because every day people are dying. In Kiribati, on average, about 4 to 8 have their foot amputated. And with a population of about 110,000, that's too small in terms of our human resource capability. So, and I think that's what I want to share on sort of macro as well. Sector planning, yes. We have, the government has introduced, take on this at the sector level planning. We have introduced what we call the Whole of Island approach. And the Whole of Island approach, where all the services and the project are to be integrated, to be implemented in the most cohesive manner. And so there are piloted islands in Kiribati, about 4 now, where we are introducing this Whole of Island approach, and where donors also come into it, as well as the communities. The good idea about that approach is the people at the community are more free to participate in making decisions and in addressing their own particular island issues, because islands in Kiribati, they have particular issues. There are island-specific issues. And so we cannot generalize all the issues across the island. So the Whole of Island approach is an attempt to coordinate more donor efforts as well as government efforts. We have established, in terms of disaster management, we have Kiribati Disaster Act, which was in the 1988 that it was established. But other than that, it doesn't actually been fully implemented. And so right now we are trying to review some of the legislations. One of them is the Disaster Act, which we thought might bring it more up to date and more realistic to events, contemporary events that are happening now in the Kiribati as well as in the region and in the world. And we have the National Drought Committee. We have the National Drought Committee. Now, Kiribati, since the last 2 years, since the drought struck the country, and we have now moved into stage 1 of the alert to now stage 2. And as I heard, we are moving to stage 3 because without the rain for the past 2 years, although occasionally come, but they are not that frequent. It has affected the ground wells because the only drinking water beside the rain is the wells, the underground wells. And the quality may not be that good or healthy, but that's it. That's what we have. We have to try and protect that. And especially in South Dara, where about half of the population of the country lives in the capital, and they are supplied from the ground wells further north in 2 villages in the north, in the main capital. And the quality of these ground reserve, the reserve wells, are seriously affected. But they are closely monitored by the authorities concerned. And as I said, we have now moving to stage 3. And under the Act, if we reach stage 3, we have to declare a state of emergency. And I think 2 years ago, the Marshall Islands did actually declare a state of emergency because of the lack of water. So, in a nutshell, I think, as I said, we have the basic structure. We have the Kiribati Joint Implementation Plan as well in place. So we have the basics set in place. The question is, how effective are the implementation? And I think that's the main issue in island countries. How effective are they to implement it? And one of the most critical issues is the financing. And that's where we earnestly request our donor partners. Although they have put in a lot of effort, and they have came up with innovative mechanisms like the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and the CHEF, Global Environmental Fund. But they have their own rules. They have their own rules which may not complement the agency of the risk that small island countries and even countries around the Pacific are facing. So with those few remarks, I hope I have enlightened you with the kind of risk we face in Kiribati and what the government and the people of Kiribati have done to address those issues, though on a very limited front. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, and for a very comprehensive overview of the not only the challenges in Kiribati, but also the work that's going on with the drought. May I invite the Fiji Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Rural and Maritime Development and National Disaster Management, Mr. Maleti Bainimarama, to make some opening remarks. Thank you.
Naka, Bulabanak. Your Excellency, distinguished colleague, Dr. Audrey Ongo, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me say what a privilege it is for me and for the government of Fiji to be sitting here to answer questions from the press, and also to thank the governments of Australia and New Zealand for making this possible. Very briefly, I will talk about cyclones in Fiji, natural disasters. We've had, for the past 30 years, we've had a total of 23 cyclones, 2 major landslides, and 9 floods. When I say the cyclones, the floods, and the landslides, these are the national ones that have affected Fiji nationally, not counting the small landslides, the small cyclones that have hit only certain parts of the country, affected the small regional parts of the country. There are some areas in Fiji, because of the heavy precipitation, we tend to get heavy flooding in the Central Division. The Central Division and the Western Division are known for heavy flooding whenever there's heavy precipitation. So when I say floods, I mean the ones that have affected the nation as a whole. Out of the disasters that we've had over the past 30 years, the most catastrophic, as I mentioned yesterday, was Cyclone Winston, which was a Category 5 cyclone. That cyclone, as I mentioned yesterday at the side event, the panel discussion, it was such a catastrophic one that it caught the nation off its feet. Not only that, it became a learning curve for the nation, because we found out that we had gaps in our processes on rehabilitation and recovery. First of all, there was a lot of support from all the nations. The regional countries, including Kiribati, the Solomons, PNG, the Marshalls, to name a few. Australia and New Zealand were there very showing their presence, and for us from day one. We had countries like France coming in, giving us their planes to take photos of areas that were destroyed. We had the governments of India and China, so many to mention, but they were all there during the first week of the cyclone. The number of cyclone, landslides, and floods that have affected our country, a point of interest I'd like to mention here is the death toll for all of this comes to about 300 plus. For a very big country, this 300 plus over a period of 30 years might sound very small. But for a very small populated country like Fiji, which has not yet reached 1 million, 300 plus is a big figure for us. The death toll from Winston was 44. And for us, that was a big figure because of the population ratio. As I said, Cyclone Winston was a learning, was not only a learning curve for Fiji government in how we needed to perfect the processes, but we need to adhere to the Sendai agreement and how we needed to really collaborate with other agencies in other countries on how we could better the processes. As I said, when we got that amount of aid that was coming in, we knew that we needed to coordinate all humanitarian support through the government, because there was a lot of duplication of support because of the catastrophic effects of Cyclone Winston. A lot of the private sector, even up to individual families, were going out to provide humanitarian support to the affected population. But there was a lot of duplication of humanitarian support. After Winston, we sat down After we started going through the recovery and rehabilitation process, the first thing that we needed to do was to set up the national cluster, the Fiji National Cluster. We came up with a cluster guideline and national humanitarian policy for disaster risk management. These two key instruments were to align the Fiji government's national priorities with humanitarian partners and donors. We are also, when I say two key instruments to align the Fiji government national priorities with humanitarian partners and donors, we realize that the cluster system, the humanitarian policy and the Fiji cluster system should not only work during and after disaster. It should also work after the disaster to provide us with sustainable development. So we came up with that. We've launched the national humanitarian policy. I think I should like to say at this point that I think we are the first country in the region to put out a national humanitarian policy. We are also emphasizing on our disaster mitigation projects, which include relocation of vulnerable coastal communities. We've relocated vulnerable coastal communities, one in the Northern Division. We're in the process of doing the same for the Eastern Division. SPC is working very closely with us, or we are also working very closely with them in the relocation in the interior of the Western Division, where there was a major landslide, and we're relocating one of the villages. So we're working very well with our partners. We are building seawalls for villages that are prone to flood surge, high water surge, providing community-based risk reduction trainings, which awareness teams go around to the communities and the villages to provide community-based disaster risk reduction training. Additionally, we have a tsunami response plan and a national tsunami drill, which will commence late this September, this year. I'm glad to see Masi from Habitat for Humanity, because we are working very closely with Masi. They've provided a booklet on building back better, and we're working with them. The Ministry of Rural and Maritime Development has also begun rural carpentry training. That's finished off in the Northern Division. When I last spoke yesterday, I said that we were about to commence in the West, but I received the email that the Western training has already started, and we're waiting to start the Eastern and the Central Division training. So with all these programs, we are trying to not only build up on sustainable development, but start our rehab and recovery. For us, the way forward for the Sendai framework is, I think we have adhered to the Sendai on the initiatives that have been carried out by the government so far. We're now available.
Thank you very much, Permanent Secretary, for sharing some of the learning, I think, from Cyclone Winston, the important capacity development challenges that the government has faced. May I please now invite the Chair of the National Disaster Operations Committee from the Solomon Islands, Mr. Lottie Yates, who's also the NDMO of the Solomon Islands. Mr. Yates, we'd be very happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Moderator. Your Excellency, Permanent Secretary Bainimarama, I would like to share some of the experiences we have in the Solomon Islands. The Solomon Islands, as you know, just like any country in the Pacific, receives all these the brunt of nature from time to time. So much so that in the past 4 or 5 years, we are forever in an operational mode where we have tsunamis, earthquakes, flash floods, tropical cyclones. We actually like to export tropical cyclones to Vanuatu and Fiji. They start around the Solomon Island water and then they travel to those two countries. And so the government, in its wisdom, we've been working on some means of ensuring that the country is prepared to deal with its disaster impacts. Now, I'm going to be very brief here. With the support of some of our major donors, DFAT, the World Bank, we have been doing a lot of work in the review of our national disaster management plans, looking at the institutional arrangements for managing risks and climate change. And so we are taking an approach where you start to do things differently. We're looking at separation of the disaster management component of the DRM and then linking risk reduction and climate change into another system within the government. As alluded to by my permanent secretary earlier on in one of his, in the panel discussions, the letter D in front of the RR is a challenge for us because every time you see the word disaster in front of RR, automatically people will say, oh, that's a disaster management component because that letter D. So we're looking at maneuvering around that particular area so that we can capture the real gist of how we're going to deal with risk reduction and climate change. Now, that said, I think coming into this conference, much of the discussions that are going on are being discussed in all the forums that we've been hearing, we've been attending. I think it is important. I think I leave this forum, this global platform, maybe looking more at time that we go into the practice of doing things. You know, it's good that we write things down, we've been discussing this, but I think the practice of doing it is the challenge everyone is still facing, and I am sure that when we get back to our country, we will be looking at ensuring that what is written gets put into practice. Madam Moderator, I think that's what I think.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, I think we've heard very clearly the case studies of 3 countries that are at the front line of disasters and responding and clearly being challenged on a number of fronts, not only from infrastructure development, but from capacity. And our last speaker talks mostly and touched on, I thought, some very interesting conceptual challenges around DRR and DRM. We have a few minutes for a couple of questions, so I'd be very happy to take any at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Excellencies and distinguished members of the panel. I just have a question. Sorry, by the way, my name is Sami Soni. I'm from the Pacific with the Islands Business Magazine. I have a question for you, Your Excellency. You talked about the fundamental element of all these climate adaptation work is the money. And yesterday at the side event, you came up with the announcement of how your government is sourcing the money to fund your adaptation work, including the buying desalination plants and strengthening of coastal seawalls. Can you just elaborate on why your government is using your own trust fund to fund that instead of waiting for the Green Climate Fund that the rest of the islands of the Pacific are doing?
Thank you for the question, particularly in relation to the financing. And if I get you right, why are we ready to use or committed to use part of our saving to finance these climate-related? Well, I made it clear in the presentation that, and I specifically mentioned the grants that we are receiving from the World Bank, although they may not be specific disaster, climate change or adaptation fund, but there's the grants we have been programmed. The government has programmed a fund to address the outer island needs, especially in relation to the sea walls and the roads and the wharves and the airfields. Transport, mainly infrastructural projects on the outer islands, because we have government has agreed to target the fund all, even if adaptation as well as grants to outer islands, because the outer islands have been left behind for so long. We thought it's about time now and they are the most vulnerable people affected in terms of this adverse effect of climate change. Even the women and children, because they are not attending schools, because the roads are not ready to, or have been affected. The quality of the road have prevented efficient transportation. And so we thought the outcry of the people are prevalent in the past since we came into office March last year. And our first parliament was bombarded with about 80% of the questions were related to climate change issues. And the last parliament too. And so we thought that since we have a saving, although it's not that much, but it's the people's money, and we thought, well, why don't we start off with it? To at least, if donors actually see us that we are really serious in addressing the needs of the people right at the grassroots, and with what we have, we might negotiate with them that in the event that funding is forthcoming, we'll try and channel these funds again to make up for the drawings that we are planning. So it's people's money. We can't wait. The donor money, well, it's forthcoming, but it's slow. It's slow to complement the agency of the issue or the problem. So that's why we took up the loan to Parliament. And we are aiming at a concessional loan where 1 or 2% interest. The Finance Ministry is now looking around for a bank that can offer a concessional loan with that concessional rate. And hopefully our donor community, when it comes to, because we are progressing our submission to the Green Climate Fund. But I mean, people's lives are at risk. A day waiting is a day too many for the others to wait. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am checking for other hands. If not, we have one more. Do we have time for one more? Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tasya Sipahutar, and I am a journalist from Jakarta, Indonesia, and I work for the Jakarta Post newspaper. I would really be grateful if you could explain to me the early warning system that works in your country, because I come from an archipelago of 17,000 islands, and I would like to know how you implement it in your own countries and in your own islands. Thank you.
Was that question directed at the President of Kiribati or any? So I might invite the Solomon Islands representative to talk with that.
Thank you. When it comes to early warning, different countries have different capabilities. And you're looking at different hazards as well, where you can either be doing an early warning for an earthquake, tsunami, or tropical cyclones, or drought. For Solomon Islands, I can share my experience. We are, like yourself, spread over 1.3 million square kilometers of ocean. We do not have good communication systems, so the use of handsets, the mobile handsets, is a challenge. The means of having an alert to the last mile is the radio coverage that we have. And so we have a national broadcaster that does that. However, there are also communities, very isolated communities, that do not have access to even transistor radios so that they can actually receive early warning information. And so how do we tackle that? We actually have a small program that we are running with communities that allows us to enable what we call a community-level early warning system. And this is by use of very simple gadgets, simple equipment. Under JICA funding, we were able to do a project that enables early warning for flood, where we installed this very simplified flood gauges in flood risk areas. And those equipment, that instrument actually triggers an alarm in the community, and that actually triggers the community's emergency response arrangements. And this is in the absence of having the National Weather Bureau disseminating the alert system. So we do have a standalone community-level early warning system that we are now rolling out in our communities. Our early warning for tsunamis would be, and if I can go back to histories of tsunamis in the Solomon Islands, over the last 100 years, we have had about 25 events of tsunamis, and those 25 events are locally generated tsunamis. So the first warning would be the size of the shake, and the people are well drilled with that. So depending very much on what you want, ours a challenge, but we are improvising. And so we look at other alternatives that gets communities to help themselves as well.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at the facilitators here and wondering if we've got time for one more question. I don't want to impose. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Gorgui Ndoye, Senegalese journalist. I'm based in Geneva, editor-in-chief of Continent Premier and correspondent for Soleil de Dakar. There has been yesterday during this panel on early warnings, what I called a philosophical problem. It was related on what languages should we use to talk to people? Are you agree that the international community needs to have a kind of international symbol in order to make it available for each country? Thank you.
We'll invite
Okay,
the
thank you very much for the question. As part of this early warning work that we are doing in the communities, one of the activities that we've undertaken is also to do a survey in our communities on the language that we use. You know, as the people disseminating the information, we are ticking off the box based on the knowledge that we have of the technical language that we use. We don't care if that message is understood by the village people or not. Considering if there is about 80% illiteracy in the communities, while you are saying, yes, I have disseminated the early warning system, I bet you none of that works because the people do not understand it. So what we have done is we work with our technical agencies, the Met services, the geohazards people, to look at the languages that they're using and therefore tone the language down a bit, ensuring that we do not water down the meaning of it. But to us, I think it is more getting more people understanding what it means and what actions to take rather than the language that we use, that we tick off the boxes because we have done it, something like that. So we are working on the messaging as well, including the one that I've just explained.
Thank you. In Fiji, first of all, I'd like to outline the processes. The early warning actually comes from the Ministry for Mineral Resources because of the technical knowledge that they have. It comes from there, then it comes straight to National Disaster Management Office. When they receive that warning, they issue the warning out. But as the Honorable Minister from Solomons has mentioned, for Fiji, the official language is English. Regardless of race, everybody speaks English. And I think because of the literacy rate, everybody understands when it comes through the medium of the mobile phone. But as I said, we're putting up a tsunami response plan, and that will be launched in September. And by then, we hope, after we put up the response plan, we'll be putting up sirens at designated areas, which is a language that everybody will understand. Thank you.
Very much. Sorry.
We don't have frequent cyclones. The only one that we have is Cyclone Pam in 2015. But to share the experience, so I think on 2 occasions, we have a radio, a national radio. That's the only means of conveying the information nationally. And the language is Kiribati, of course, but the other official language is English for those non-speaking. But the experience I wanted to share was when the announcement came out that there's a strong wind passing through, a very strong one. And there was this panic because that was the first time. So we have to manage, especially because the experience is lacking in Kiribati for such kind of events. But I realized that warning systems are important and to be managed properly. And when it comes to disasters, in terms of coordination, because there's a national issue, the Office of the President under the Act is mandated to take the lead. So, yeah, warning systems, I think we have about just 2. But people were panicking, but in the end, nothing came. There's nothing. That was, and they were climbing trees. They were, well, the coconut tree is probably the highest place that we can hide in, but whether it is safe or not, that's another question. Thank you.
Please, you can associate that with a joke. All right. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, thank you to our participants, our panelists, thank you. And can I also thank UNISDR really for facilitating this. And this is probably our last moment as a region to also, and if I can just indulge you for a moment, thank Timothy Wilcox for his leadership and his coordination. He is our representative in the region. We don't know, Timothy, if we'll see much of you again, but on behalf of the Pacific region, we thank you for your leadership, for your coordination, for the support of the Pacific.